Lilith, Selene, Dracula, Carmilla, Blade. These are the names of a dying race. Not just that, but a group who were powerful predators of the dark world. With the passage of time and the modernization of humanity, it became even more difficult to stay in the shadows. Prey gets harder to find when you find yourself no longer at the top of the food chain, much like the vampires of the old world that had become endangered. Abandoning games such as Erebos for the PC, the last of a dying genre, left behind by the ever-changing landscape at the turn of the century. Released in 2001, Erebos was an FMV point-and-click horror game about vampires made by the Greek studio Nyx. Now, if you haven't already noticed, this game is steeped in Greek mythology. Erebos, or Erebus, is the personification of darkness itself. Born from the goddess of chaos along with his sister/wife, the personification of night, Nyx. Now, if you're chronicling online, and let's face it, if you find my channel, you definitely are, you've probably seen this game briefly in a Wendigoon video, and its gimmick that this game will probably be most celebrated for.
If you try to turn on the game when it's still daylight, the game won't let you play it because vampires aren't supposed to be out in the day.
The game starts you off with a Blair Witch-like found footage cinematic of what I assume are the vampire hunters, and then you are free to select from our two heroes, Eric Cobblepot, a deranged and bloodthirsty vampire driven mad by his many immortal years that had broken free from an asylum, and Giannos Romar, a stowaway to Japan where he was taught martial arts and was then vamptized at the age of 23.
While you're eating the blood of innocent women, I was studying the blade.
Eric can transform into a bat and Giannos a crow. Now, going through the game's character menu and later in game on a computer journal forum, you see that different vampires have metamorphoses of different animals, and even into people. This could possibly be another reference in Greek mythology, which is no stranger to vampire-like folklore of different types, ones that eat flesh and shapeshift. This is actually so ingrained in Greek culture that during the Great Famine of Greece, during the Nazi occupation of 1941 to 44, people were concerned not only for the increasing death rate, but also with the overflow of graveyards causing burials to be held en masse outside of a cemetery. The thought of their loved ones coming back as a vampire frightening them to the point that families would behead their dead before buried. Anyway, the stories are the same regardless who you choose, besides one level and the ending. So after you choose your character, it starts you off in a house. You have to find your way into the next room to feed on the victim that is locked in there. But before you can, you hear a loud crash and a jolting scream from the other room. When you decide to break the door down with an axe, you spot another vampire feeding on your already dead victim. You have a conversation with this vampire because she is your friend Cassandra. Ironically, she tells you to be careful and that she hasn't felt safe lately. The game then hard cuts to some old film and a newspaper clipping that mentions the date was 1936, and that this was the 5th vampire attack that month. Hard cut again to 63 years later, and another found footage video showing the opposite from the intro. The hunter becomes the hunted. The year is 1999, and it's just like any old night and you get your dusty, crusty ass out of bed for another bloodletting. Out in the public, you encounter a masked individual holding the same stakes as the hunters seen before. Using your quick thinking, you take him out, slurp that good shit, and find a note on his body. You rush to Cassandra's home and see nothing but her closed casket there. This becomes the inciting incident for our protagonist, who goes to an address left behind by Cassandra, to find that this is more than just a few people. It's an entire organization called Erebos, who has been keeping tabs on vampires in the area. You vow to take out every living member. Anyway, you're not here to hear me yapping about the story of this game, however unique it may be, whether it's the temporal game mechanics, or being one of the earliest games in the industry you play as the bad guys. Unfortunately, Custer's Revenge still existed at the time. There's something curious about this game and its developers. The air around it isn't disturbing, but enigmatic. Not much can be said, most reviews about it are few and far between, and reception was lukewarm at that. I'm probably losing you on the subject, but that's the thing about this game. There is nothing. It's as if it exists in a vacuum of its own making. Someone here and there mentions Erebos on a forum, and they range from enthusiastic to just weird. Seriously, this guy just bumps this post for 5 years straight. Nothing from its past or future are present in the information that exists for this game, not even on 3 people that worked on it. Looking up any of these names doesn't bring any immediate obvious results, and trying to dig deeper was fruitless. only coming up with similar names, but nothing indicating I found the people I'm looking for. This paper, written by, I hope I'm saying this right, Alenia Royanyati, stated games like Erebos were specifically marketed to the Greeks, so maybe it was more celebrated over there. And I understand that they could just be living normal lives, spending the majority of their time offline like anybody should. But at the same time, it is odd that not even the Wayback Machine can find anything about this, or the people who made it. Brides of Dracula is a 1960 movie directed by Terence Fisher and released by Hammer Films. It's the sequel in the Dracula trilogy starring Christopher Lee, except for this one, with Peter Cushing reprising his role as Van Helsing and David Peel starring opposite of him. The story is about Van Helsing going head-to-head against Baron Meinster and his mother to prevent him from creating a vampire wife army. Brides of Dracula for the Amiga, Commodore 64, and the Atari ST is a game based on this movie, sort of, in which two players, one controlling Van Helsing and the other Dracula, race against time and prevent each other from completing their goals. Except, it doesn't exist. Well, not in an official, mass-released, to an audience type of way. Developed by Toast Department and Gonzo Games, Brides of Dracula was not released in 1992. Worked on by Alan Botwright, Jason Green, George Wilkins, Paul Smith, and Stephen Howard. Now, Paul and Steve were already well regarded after their two games, Werewolves of London and Brides of Frankenstein, successes for Viz Design, a publishing label of a company that closed in 1988 called Areolasoft? Described as a spy versus spy-like, Brides of Dracula impressively flaunted the ability to have characters in two different places on the level at the same time on split screen, as well as packed with puzzles, weaponry, and strange encounters. The hype for this game was very much hype. So much so that gaming magazine Zap64 held a competition for a leather jacket with the game art on it and a copy of the game. The gang was running at full steam, working tirelessly to get the game out on 3 different consoles. Adrian Carpenter, the distributor for Gonzo, said, "Dev guys literally lived in the back office of the building, and I watched in awe as they developed the game. It was like black magic." And much like meddling with black magic, things drastically turned for the worse. It was 98% finished. That was the response Alan Botwright made when games that weren't questioned him on the matter. Jason Green also mentioned that they were close to having the Commodore 64 version finished before Paul Smith skipped out of the country, with all the money Toast Department was owed. And that was it. Gonzo was gone, so they had to halt development because 1, their invoices remain unpaid, and 2, their publishing label was AWOL. So the game was never finished. And by extension, no one got to see a sweet leather jacket. And with Paul Smith himself, well, that had to be the best name to go into cover with because it is impossible to find someone with that name that isn't a giant fucking fashion designer. Some people who claim to be the people who knew and worked with Paul, including Steve Howard himself, confirmed one thing. Paul scammed them all. Alan claimed that he still might have a copy of the game somewhere on a floppy, but seeing as floppy drives and Commodore 64s are a rarity these days, and as this was last updated in 2019, the likeliness of this being found is, unfortunately, very low. Commodore Format and Zap64 were both given a demo of the game before release, but according to Commodore Format, both mags had a heartbreaking and brutal process of getting rid of things they considered junk. But as with no update, that also means that it could still be out there. At least, some are hopeful it is.